Today on Sugar Spun Run, I'll be showing you how to make homemade hand pies. Hey Sugar Spun Bakers, Sam here, and today I am so excited to be sharing another carefully tested, well-researched, and perfected recipe. These hand pies are really simple to make completely from scratch. I'm going to be walking you through all of the steps, and you can use pretty much any fruit that you'd like for a filling. Now to begin, let's go ahead and make our homemade pie crust, which is actually just a double batch of the pie crust that's already on my blog, super simple. And to keep this nice and simple, we're going to be using my food processor. Now, if you don't have a food processor, check the description, check out the printable recipe. I do include notes so you can make this without one. If you do have one, you're going to want to add 2 cups of all-purpose flour to the basin. We'll also add 4 teaspoons of granulated sugar just to give a little bit of sweetness, and a half teaspoon of salt. Now we'll add our lid and just very briefly pulse everything to combine it together. All right, the next thing you need is 12 tablespoons of unsalted butter. And now you want this butter to be really cold as possible. It can even be frozen. Now I have mine cut into pieces. You will want to make sure yours is as well. And we're just going to scatter that evenly over the surface of our flour mixture. All right, now we're going to pulse again, and we're just going to do this until the butter is cut into the mixture. So once you're finished, let me show you with a spoon so you can take a look at what the dough should look like at this point. The butter is not completely gone. You can actually still see little pieces. This mixture resembles coarse crumbs is what I usually say. That's what you're aiming for. Okay, at this point, we'll grab my secret ingredient for the most flavorful, flaky, and perfect pie crust, and that is 1/2 cup of sour cream. This is full fat sour cream. You'll wanna make sure you use full fat. We'll just add this on top of our dough, or crumb mixture at this point. And now we're going to pulse everything just until the batter begins to cling together. Now you don't want to overdo it, but you do want to make this easy on yourself, so make sure things are clinging together. Let's take a peek at this. So you can see the dough, it's still a little bit crumbly, but there's no discernible flour left. And if you take the dough and you pinch it together between your thumb and your fingers, you can see it's clinging together perfectly. So what we want to do at this point is we're just going to divide it about in half, and I'm going to transfer each half onto a piece of plastic wrap. And while I have it on the plastic wrap, I'm just going to use that to form it into a ball and then flatten it into a disc, and then just cover each of these and wrap each of these really tightly. Now, you don't have to divide the dough in 2, but when I go to roll this out, I like to work with just half at a time. That way, the other half can just sit in the fridge while I'm working. Especially if it's really hot in my kitchen, it's nice to only be working with and warming 1/2 of the dough at a time. So when I'm finished with that, the other one is nice and cold still. So this pie dough is going to need to chill in the refrigerator for at least 30 to 60 minutes. It can sit in there longer. You can make this a day or even a couple days ahead of time. While the dough is chilling, what I like to do is prepare the fruit filling. Now, in the printable recipe, I've included a couple notes because if you're using a berry filling, the steps are going to be a little bit different than if you're using a firmer fruit like apples. Today I am using apples, so I'll be walking you through those steps. And this whole process with berries or apples is going to be done on the stovetop, so you'll want to grab yourself a medium-sized saucepan. Now you're going to need 8 ounces of apples, which is about 2 cups of apples, and I always weigh this after I have prepped the apples. In this instance, as you can see, I've cored the apples, peeled them, and I've diced them into small pieces. So if you take a look here, these pieces are really small. They're all smaller than 1/2 inch. You want to keep them nice and small so that when you're cooking them, they become nice and tender. They're also going to absorb a lot of flavor this way. Along with the apples, we will add 1/3 cup of firmly packed brown sugar and 2 tablespoons of unsalted butter. Now turn your stovetop heat to medium, and we are going to want to stir this pretty constantly, but don't turn your heat up too high at this point. What we want to do is we just want to keep mixing everything together until that butter right there, until it's nice and completely melted. Once your butter is melted, we are going to add 2 tablespoons of cornstarch, a 1/2 teaspoon of ground cinnamon, and 1/8 teaspoon of salt. Now stir everything really well because you want to get that cornstarch completely absorbed. You want to make sure there are no lumps in there. And we are just going to stir pretty much constantly until this mixture begins to thicken. All right, so all those juices, they're looking nice and thick, kind of syrupy. So at this point, I want to take them off the heat. I'm just going to actually turn my stovetop heat off, and right now I'm going to add a 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla extract. Just going to add such a nice flavor. It already smells so good in here. This filling needs to cool completely before you can get it anywhere near your pie dough because it would actually melt it if you tried to add it right now. So we're going to let it cool down, and while you could do this in the saucepan, I'm just going to speed up the process a little bit and I'm going to transfer it to a heat-proof dish, and then I'm just gonna pop it in the fridge, just to move things along. Now right about now, I like to start preheating my oven. You'll need to preheat your oven to 400 degrees Fahrenheit. Once your pie dough is fully chilled, we can pull that out of the fridge and start working with it. And as I mentioned earlier, I just like to work with half at a time. Now we're going to roll this out on a clean, lightly floured surface. And one thing I really want to stress to you is it's really difficult. I don't want to say you can't add too much flour, but it's really difficult to. You want to make sure you are flouring this dough as much as you need to, and maybe even more importantly, you're flouring the surface. So as I roll this out, I'm just going to be pausing periodically and using a spatula just to make sure it's not sticking to the surface, because if that happens, you're never going to be able to get your little cutouts out of this dough. It's just going to be a mess. Okay, I rolled this dough out until it's a little bit thinner than 1/4 of an inch, and now we can start cutting it into our shapes. With hand pies, you can really make them any shape that you'd like, but for today's recipe, what I like to use is a round cookie cutter. This is 3 inches in diameter. If you don't have one, maybe you have a glass or a bowl in your kitchen somewhere that you could use instead. That would be fine. Now we're just going to cut out our circles, keeping the cuts as close together as possible, because of course we want to get as many of these out of our dough as possible. All right, so I've cut out as many as I can, so now I'm going to start transferring these to a parchment paper lined baking sheet. And these might look a little bit crowded on the baking sheet, but what I'm doing is I'm only going to be cooking 6, but I want to make sure that I have the bottom half and the top half of the dough. So I'm just pairing them off like that. All right, before we go any further with this, you're going to want to make a really quick egg wash, which is just 1 large egg that's whisked together with 1 teaspoon of water. We're just going to use a pastry brush to brush just the bottom half of each hand pie. So the top half does not need to be brushed yet, we're just doing the bottom. This is going to help the top half to stick to it, and it's also going to help keep the pastry from becoming soggy. It's going to help keep it nice and crisp, even once you have the filling in there. Okay, now let's address the tops for each hand pie. You're going to want to put a vent in the top of each of these. You can do an X, you can do a slash. I just like to do 2 little vents for each circle that's going to be the top half of my hand pie. Okay, my apple filling is nice and cool at this point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to scoop that, and you're going to need about a tablespoon or maybe a heaping tablespoon of filling for each hand pie. And I'll just add that right in the center, and then grab my top half, and we'll press that right on top. And then we'll crimp these shut by using the tines of a fork just to press the top half into the bottom half. Now I recommend doing these one at a time, so doing the filling and then adding the top one at a time. If you do the filling and all of them first, it has the tendency to start running out of the hand pie and things can get a little bit messy. All right, now we're going to want to brush the tops of every hand pie with some more of that egg wash. And this step is optional, especially if you're going to be doing a glaze on top of your hand pies, but I like to take a little bit of coarse sugar or just regular granulated sugar and evenly sprinkle that over the surface of each hand pie. It's a nice little sweetness. Now I should note that if at any point you feel like your pie dough is becoming difficult to work with, especially when you're assembling your hand pies, pop it in the fridge, just put the whole tray in the fridge until it is easy to work with again. If you feel like you're in a warm environment and the dough is just starting to kind of melt on itself, but you've gotten them together, I still would recommend popping it in the fridge for 15 minutes or so, just to let the dough have some time to get nice and cold before you put it in the oven. Otherwise, things can get a little messy. Now, by some miracle, even though I'm working under some pretty hot lights today, my dough is fine. It really has held its shape really well, and I don't feel like it's melting at all. So these are going straight into my preheated oven. That's at 400 degrees, and they're going to need to bake for about 15 minutes. When your hand pies are finished baking, the edges should be a nice golden brown color. The tops may even be beginning to turn a nice light golden brown. And all you have to do at this point is let them cool before you dig in. Of course, if you'd like, you can dust the tops with powdered sugar. You can make a super simple glaze that I've included instructions for in the printable recipe, but I just like to enjoy them just like this. And that is how you make homemade fruit hand pies. I hope you guys enjoyed this recipe. I think you're going to love the homemade filling, the buttery flaky crust. I can't wait for you to try this one out. And when you do, please let me know what you think. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. So good.